The first thing Mike Tyson felt was the smell. Not fear, not anger, but a thick, metallic stench that clung to the air of the prison corridor like rusted blood. It was early, before the guards fully woke up, before the noise of keys and boots turned the place alive. In that quiet, something was wrong. Mike sensed it before he saw it, the way fighters sense a punch before it lands. This was not the roar of a crowd or the glare of lights. This was a narrow hallway, concrete walls, and a moment that would decide whether he lived or died. Most people think prison breaks men instantly. They imagine fear flattening everyone the same way. But Mike was different, and that difference made him a target. Inside those walls, his name was both a shield and a curse. Some inmates respected it, others wanted to test it, and a few wanted to erase it. On this day, the balance tipped toward the last group. He didn't know their faces yet. He didn't know their plan. He only knew that the silence felt staged, like the pause before a bell rings. As he stepped forward, chains scraping lightly against his wrists, a guard glanced at him and then looked away too quickly. That was the first sign. In prison, eye contact is language. Avoiding it is a warning. Mike caught it, filed it away, and kept walking. His mind raced, not with panic, but with calculation. Years in the ring had trained him for moments like this, not the violence, but the waiting. The seconds where everything hangs and instinct has to outrun fear.
Behind him, footsteps slowed. Ahead of him, the corridor narrowed. It wasn't an accident. It was choreography. Mike's heart thudded, steady and heavy, like a drumbeat he had heard all his life. He thought of how strange it was that the same body once protected by millions of dollars and flashing cameras now stood exposed under flickering fluorescent lights. No crowd, no referee, no rules. Just men and choices. This was the day he would come closer to death than any knockout ever brought him, closer than the fights, closer than the chaos of fame, closer than the demons that followed him into that cell. And the terrifying part was this: nobody on the outside would ever know how close it came. No headlines, no slow-motion replays, just a decision made in seconds that would change everything. Before we go any further, if stories like this pull you in, if you want to understand what really happens when legends lose their armor, take a second to subscribe and like this video. It helps more than you think, and it keeps stories like this coming. Because what happened next inside that corridor wasn't about boxing anymore. It was about survival, and Mike Tyson was about to learn how thin the line between fear and death really is. 8 seconds remained before the trap snapped shut. The first movement came from the left, not fast, but deliberate. A shadow peeled itself off the wall, then another. Mike's instinct screamed before his eyes fully processed it. This wasn't random tension, this was a setup. 2 inmates stepped into his path, blocking the narrow corridor, their bodies angled just enough to look casual to a distant camera, just enough to look like nothing was happening at all. Behind him, footsteps stopped. The silence thickened, pressing against his ears. One of the men smiled. Not a loud smile, not a confident one. It was thin and tight, the kind that carried bad intentions without needing words. "You walk like you own the place," the man muttered, voice low. Mike didn't answer. He had learned long ago that words waste time when danger is already breathing in your space. His eyes flicked, measuring distance, shoulders, hands. He noticed the slight bulge under one man's shirt. Not a gun, too small. A blade, maybe improvised. Prison weapons were never clean, never predictable. In the ring, Mike thrived on control. Here, control was an illusion. Chains limited his movement. Concrete offered no bounce, no give. And the guards, they were present in body only.
A few stood far enough away to claim ignorance later, eyes drifting, hands resting on belts like statues. This was the second sign. When authority looks away, it's permission. The man in front stepped closer, invading Mike's space. "You think your name saves you in here?" he whispered. That's when Mike understood. This wasn't about respect, it was about reputation. Killing or breaking him would turn these men into legends of their own, whispered about in cells and showers, a trophy bigger than any belt. Mike felt the familiar heat rise in his chest, the old rage that once fueled knockouts in seconds. But prison punished rage. Rage got you stabbed. Rage got you isolated. He forced himself to breathe, slow and deep, grounding himself in the moment. Fear tried to crawl in, but he pushed it down. Fear was loud. Discipline was quiet.
Without warning, the man behind him lunged. The sound came first, a sharp scrape of metal against fabric. Mike twisted as far as the chains allowed, the blade grazing his side instead of sinking in. Pain flared, hot and immediate. Blood welled. The corridor exploded into motion. One man grabbed his shoulders, another reached for his throat. This was it. This was the point of no return. Mike reacted not like a boxer, but like an animal cornered. He dropped his weight, slammed backward, felt ribs crack against his spine. A grunt of surprise, a moment of imbalance. That moment was everything. He drove forward, head low, shoulder first, using mass and momentum instead of technique. Chains clattered, bodies collided, someone yelled. Somewhere a guard shouted, too late to matter. Mike's lungs burned, his vision narrowed, the world shrank to sounds and pressure and pain. He didn't think about winning, he thought about breathing again, about staying upright, about surviving the next second. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it shifted. Not ended, shifted, because death hadn't finished making its choice yet. Time slowed, stretching every heartbeat into something heavy and unreal. Mike felt hands tear at his shirt, felt the sting along his ribs where blood warmed the concrete air. Someone slipped, another cursed, and the narrow corridor became chaos instead of choreography. That chaos saved him. In prison, violence is quick when it is clean. When it turns messy, fear creeps in. Fear makes mistakes.
A siren wailed somewhere distant, not loud enough to stop anything, but loud enough to remind everyone that consequences existed. The men hesitated. Just a fraction. Mike used it. He twisted, planted his feet, and drove his shoulder again, forcing space where none should exist. Breath tore from his lungs in ragged bursts. He tasted iron. Still, he stayed standing. One attacker backed away, eyes wide now, reassessing the cost. The other froze, blade lowered, calculating angles that no longer lined up. Mike didn't chase, he didn't boast. He just stared, eyes steady, promising that the next move would be worse for them than for him. That promise landed. They retreated, fast, melting back into shadows as if they had never been there. The guards finally arrived with noise and authority, shouting orders that echoed off concrete walls. Hands grabbed Mike, not gently. Questions came rapid and empty. He didn't answer much. In prison, talking is another kind of wound. Medics patched him with efficiency, tape pulling at skin, antiseptic burning. A shallow cut, they said, lucky. Still, he stayed standing. One attacker backed away, eyes wide now, reassessing the cost. The other froze, blade lowered, calculating angles that no longer lined up. Mike didn't chase, he didn't boast. He just stared, eyes steady, promising that the next move would be worse for them than for him. That promise landed. They retreated, fast, melting back into shadows as if they had never been there. The guards finally arrived with noise and authority, shouting orders that echoed off concrete walls. Hands grabbed Mike, not gently. Questions came rapid and empty. He didn't answer much. In prison, talking is another kind of wound. Medics patched him with efficiency, tape pulling at skin, antiseptic burning. A shallow cut, they said. Lucky. Still, he stayed standing. Mike knew better. Luck had nothing to do with it. Simple truth did. Back in his cell, the adrenaline drained, leaving exhaustion and a quiet tremor in his hands. He sat on the bunk and stared at the floor, replaying every second. He understood something then that no championship had ever taught him. Survival isn't about strength alone. It's about restraint. About knowing when not to unleash everything inside you.
If you're still watching, take a second to breathe with him. Stories like this aren't just about legends, they're about choices. If this moment has you hooked, tap like and subscribe now, because the next part reveals what that night changed forever. The prison never apologized. It never admitted failure. But the tone shifted. Eyes followed him differently. Whispers carried caution instead of hunger. The wardens tightened routines. The inmates adjusted distance. Mike walked the same corridors, slower now, calmer, alive. Death had brushed past him, close enough to feel its breath, and moved on. He remained, changed, aware that surviving once doesn't make you invincible. It makes you careful. And in that place, careful was power. He learned to sleep lightly, to listen harder, to respect silence. Every day became a test, every step a decision. The legend faded, the man sharpened, and that lesson, carved in concrete and fear, stayed with him long after the doors would finally open again. This was survival, not glory, and it demanded humility, patience, and the will to endure when no one is watching. That truth never left him. Afterward, forever. Night after night, the memory replayed itself without permission. Not the fight, not the blood, but the moment right before it all exploded. The moment when instinct whispered danger and he almost ignored it. In prison, hesitation can cost more than pride. It can cost breath, future, everything. Mike understood that now in a way no trainer could ever explain. The days that followed were quieter, but not safer. Quiet in prison is deceptive. It isn't peace, it's pressure. Men watched him from corners, measuring him again, testing whether the story would hold. One incident doesn't erase a reputation, it only reshapes it. Mike didn't try to rebuild fear, he rebuilt discipline. He woke earlier, trained smarter, conserved energy. Power unused became power respected. One afternoon in the yard, a guard stopped him. Not aggressively, not kindly either, just long enough to let authority hang in the air. The guard warned him to keep his head down. Mike nodded. It wasn't submission, it was strategy. The strongest men in prison aren't the loudest, they're the ones who last. Word spread anyway. Not exaggeration, not myth, just fact. Someone had tried to end him. Someone had failed. That failure mattered more than the attempt. In places like this, outcomes write the rules. Mike became an equation nobody wanted to solve again. Still, nights were the hardest. Alone with the sounds of metal and distant shouts, he confronted something scarier than attackers. He confronted himself. The anger that once fueled knockouts now threatened to burn him alive. He realized that if he let rage decide his actions in prison, he wouldn't survive another year. Strength had to be quiet now, controlled, purposeful. If you're feeling this shift, this deeper layer of the story, this is where it matters most. Stories like these aren't about fists, they're about choices under pressure. If you want more stories that go beyond headlines and into the moments that define legends, make sure you're subscribed right now. Weeks passed. Nothing happened. That was the victory. No blades, no ambushes, just routine. Mike learned to read the rhythm of the place, the subtle changes in sound that meant trouble, the pauses that meant eyes were watching. He became less visible, yet more aware. Alive because he adapted. And then one night, as lights dimmed and doors slammed shut, he understood the truth that had saved him. Prison doesn't care who you were. It only respects who you are right now. That night, when death came close, he stopped being a name and became a survivor. Not because he fought harder than anyone else, but because he chose to live smarter than everyone expected. That lesson settled into him, heavy and permanent. Whatever waited beyond those walls, he knew one thing for certain. If he could survive this, he could survive anything. And that belief, quiet and unbreakable, became his real strength. The turning point didn't come with violence, it came with recognition. One morning, as Mike stood in line for breakfast, he noticed something subtle but powerful. Space. Men who once crowded him now kept distance. Not fear exactly, but caution, respect's quieter cousin. In prison, that shift can mean survival. He stopped trying to prove anything. No staring contests, no flexing, no reminders of who he used to be. That version of Mike belonged to arenas and cameras. This version belonged to concrete floors and locked doors. The more he let go of his past image, the more control he gained over his present. There was a moment during work detail when a younger inmate slipped and nearly fell. Instinctively, Mike reached out and steadied him. The kid froze, eyes wide, realizing whose arm had just saved him from hitting the ground. Word traveled faster than fists ever could. Not that Mike was dangerous, but that he was aware, grounded, human. That humanity mattered. Prison strips people down to reactions. Mike rebuilt himself with intention. He trained not to intimidate, but to focus. Push-ups became meditation. Breathing became armor. Each day he reminded himself that survival wasn't about dominance. It was about clarity. A counselor once asked him what scared him most. Mike didn't answer right away. Then he said the truth. Losing control again. The counselor nodded. Control in a place designed to remove it was power, real power. If you're still watching, you already understand something important. This story isn't about prison, it's about pressure, about what happens when everything you thought defined you disappears. If that resonates, hit like, leave a comment, and let me know what part of this story hit you hardest. It helps more than you think. As months passed, the danger faded into background noise. Not gone, just quieter. Mike learned that surviving prison wasn't a single moment of bravery. It was hundreds of small decisions. When to speak, when to stay silent, when to walk away even if pride screamed otherwise. And then came the day he realized he would make it out. Not because his sentence would end, but because prison no longer owned him. Fear didn't dictate his movements. Anger didn't choose his reactions. He had faced death once and learned from it. That lesson stayed. The irony wasn't lost on him. Outside, he had been feared. Inside, he had learned restraint. And that restraint saved his life. The night he almost died wasn't the end of him. It was the beginning of something harder, quieter, and far more powerful. When the gates finally opened, he wouldn't walk out unchanged. He would walk out sharpened, alive not just in body, but in understanding. Some men leave prison broken, others leave rebuilt. Mike Tyson left knowing that surviving death had taught him how to live. The story didn't end, and then came the day he realized he would make it out. Not because his sentence would end, but because prison no longer owned him. Fear didn't dictate his movements. Anger didn't choose his reactions. He had faced death once and learned from it. That lesson stayed. The irony wasn't lost on him. Outside, he had been feared. Inside, he had learned restraint. And that restraint saved his life. The night he almost died wasn't the end of him. It was the beginning of something harder, quieter, and far more powerful. When the gates finally opened, he wouldn't walk out unchanged. He would walk out sharpened, alive not just in body, but in understanding. Some men leave prison broken, others leave rebuilt.
Mike Tyson left knowing that surviving death had taught him how to live. The story didn't end with the gate opening. It ended with the silence that followed. Freedom felt strange, not loud or triumphant, but heavy with responsibility. Mike stepped into the outside world carrying lessons carved by concrete and steel. He had faced death without cameras, without crowds, without applause. That mattered more than any belt he ever wore. The man who walked out was quieter, slower, and far more dangerous, in a different way. He understood consequences, patience, and the value of walking away. Survival had rewritten his definition of strength. Years later, people would still talk about knockouts and rage. Few would understand that the most important fight happened when nobody was watching. It happened in a narrow space where choices matter more than power. That night taught him restraint, awareness, and humility. It taught him that legends are not defined by how hard they hit, but by how they endure.
If this story kept you watching, it's because something in it felt real. Moments like these remind us that strength is built when everything is at risk. If you haven't already, take a second to like this video and subscribe for more stories like this. Your support keeps these stories alive and coming back stronger. In the end, Mike Tyson didn't survive prison because he was feared. He survived because he learned when not to be. That lesson followed him long after the doors closed behind him. Some stories entertain, but this one warns, teaches, and lingers. Because sometimes the closest brush with death is what finally shows you how to live. And if you carry one thing from this video, let it be this truth. Survival is not about being the strongest in the room, but the wisest in the moment. Thank you for staying until the end, and I'll see you in the next story. Until then, remember that even in the darkest places, awareness can be the difference between fear and survival. That is the lesson written in silence, paid for with restraint, and earned without applause. It is a reminder that life tests everyone eventually, just not always in public. When that test comes, what you choose matters more than who you are. This story ends here, but its meaning travels with you. Legends fade, headlines disappear, but lessons like these stay sharp. They wait quietly until the moment you need them most. And when that moment arrives, you'll understand why this story mattered. Because survival is never about the past, only about the decision you make next. That decision saved him, and it can change anyone willing to learn.
Stay sharp, stay aware, and never underestimate the power of control. This was not just a prison story. It was a survival blueprint. And if it kept you watching, sharing it helps others learn the same lesson. I'll see you again with another story that goes deeper than the headlines. Until then, stay safe, stay curious, and keep watching. Your next lesson is coming.